Today, our guest is Professor Riccardo Pelizzo, the acting dean from the Graduate School of Public Policy.
In recent years, I started working on traditional beliefs, and what we found in a nutshell is that from political behavior, from electoral behavior, from deciding where to go to vote in the election, to deciding where to vote for one party or another, the level of trust in government, they are all affected by these traditional beliefs. Even among young Kazakhstani today, traditional beliefs are rather common, roughly just as common as they were 20 years ago. And we also detected that they are much more likely not to trust the government, not to trust other citizens. And that creates a huge governance problem.
Why do traditional beliefs matter? Why are they important? And how do traditional beliefs influence political behavior?
That's a very important question for which I don't have a very good answer.
Hello and welcome to Voices from GSPP Research and Practice. This is a new initiative and podcast where ideas meet action. I'm Dina Sharipova, and each episode we bring you voices from across the GSPP community, researchers, faculty members, PhD students, alumni, and many other interesting people who shape the future of public policy. Here we explore cutting-edge research, real-world policy challenges, and career journeys of those who turn evidence into impact. Whether you are interested in research, governance, or policy making, this is place for you. Thank you for joining us, and let's begin our conversation. And today, our guest is Professor Riccardo Pelizzo, the acting dean from the Graduate School of Public Policy. Riccardo, you are very welcome.
Thank you.
And I know that you are one of the leading and top researchers in Nazarbayev University and, of course, at the Graduate School of Public Policy. And you have many different research programs. And one of them is about traditional beliefs, political parties, parliaments. Mm-hmm. Could you tell a little bit about the academic career?
Sure. I mean, I'm Italian. I studied at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. I got my PhD in 2004. My focus for doctoral research was on political parties. That was my main area of expertise. And I keep working on political parties, party systems, and especially party system change. And with a colleague of mine in Australia called Zim Vokora, we have created an index of fluidity that captures the changeability or the propensity to change of party systems in a cross-national perspective. So that's very interesting. I also did quite a bit of work on parliaments. I think that's the line of work that I have done that has been more impactful, both in terms of citations, visibility, but also on a practical level, because much of my early work with World Bank colleagues on legislative oversight, public account committees, has led to reforms around the planet, actually, from Southeast Asia to African country and so forth and so on. So that has been really rewarding. I really think, and I've always believed that doing research is the most beautiful thing that you can possibly do. But when you see that your research is actually appreciated by your peers and actually has a practical impact on the world, that's actually is a source of great joy for me. And then in recent years, I started working on traditional beliefs. I think that the line of work started when I did with Pasquino a book called The Culture of Accountability in 2022, where we were looking at the various types of ways in which we can conceptualize political culture or cultural factors, and we wanted to see where and to what extent the quality or the level of accountability in about 100 countries around the planet varies because or as a result of variation in cultural conditions. And so from that I went on to study, traditional beliefs that I thought had been looked at from a variety of perspectives, from anthropology to sociology to some streams of political science, but in ways that I didn't find fully satisfactory. And so that was captured my attention. That's why I started doing that type of research.
Mm-hmm. So could you please explain then why do traditional beliefs matter? Why are they important? And how do traditional beliefs influence political behavior in contemporary societies and particularly in Central Asia?
Well, traditional beliefs are very, very important. They're essential for traditional societies because they are what they keep traditional societies together. There's a nice book by James Fraser called The Devil's Advocate, and he said, in this primitive or traditional societies, there was the belief that the king is the son of the gods and therefore is not a human like the rest of us. And so, and that was all fine and dandy until people realized that he actually was not of divine origins, and they chopped his head. And so, so actually the political order was preserved because of some traditional beliefs. So traditional beliefs are instrumental in traditional societies to keep those societies together and to make the reforms of governance work. Obviously, it is very different when it comes to modern societies because we are no longer traditional. We are societies in which the overwhelming majority of us is potentially secular, but certainly has a rational mindset, which is incompatible with the traditional magic, superstition mindset of traditional believers. And so, that creates a problem. And so we wanted to see how extensive these traditional beliefs are around the world and even in Central Asia, obviously, and what are the political consequences. And what we found in a nutshell is that from political behavior, from electoral behavior, from deciding where to go to vote in the election, to deciding where to vote for one party or another, the level of trust in government, they're all affected, attitudes toward democracy, they are all affected by these traditional beliefs.
Okay, very, very interesting. And Riccardo, you mentioned about this importance of trust, right? Especially institutional trust. So how do informal norms and these traditional beliefs actually influence trust in institutions? What are the mechanisms? What are the connections?
That's a very important question for which I don't have a very good answer, in the sense that this is something that has been detected in the literature. There's a lot of work by a guy called Gershman, and he's a psychologist, and he's done a lot of work on witchcraft beliefs and their diffusion and their impact on social capital and trust, and that has shown consistently, with large N kind of studies that, consistently countries in which there's a higher percentage of the population that believes in witchcraft, the level of trust is lower. So there's a clear negative relationship between the two variables. We have done similar analysis with Kazakhstani data, with original survey conducted by one of my former student, Professor Kujanbayev from Maksud Naribayev University, and he collected this data, and we did find that actually even among young Kazakhstani today, there's traditional beliefs are rather common, and they're roughly just as common as they were 20 years ago, which is kind of surprising because you think that as a society becomes richer, more modern, Astana today is not what it was 20 years ago, people will develop a more materialistic, modern, rational approach. And instead, what we detected is that the percentage of respondents who report believing in these traditional beliefs is still very high. And we also detected that they are much more likely to be not to trust the government, not to trust other citizens. So, there is this clear correlation. What's the causal mechanism behind? I don't know. That's, I think, the topic for a great paper, actually.
Yeah, or maybe for qualitative research as well, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think this is a very important and understudied area of research. I think we're just, as far as I'm concerned, we're just scratching the surface. I know psychologists have started doing some work on it. Economists have become interested in these kind of topics. Obviously, political scientists have quite a bit of interest. So I think all the social sciences have become very interested in this line of work. And we've started detecting correlations or causal relationships between variables. What we don't know is why that's the case. So the next wave of research, I think, we'll have to look into it and try to understand what's the logic or the explanation behind it.
Yeah, very interesting, Riccardo. So you mentioned also about social capital and particularly the importance of trust. So do you think that traditional beliefs can be also referred to social capital? And do you think that traditional beliefs, in fact, either weaken or strengthen social cohesion? Because, social capital is about norms, is about networking, is about trust. Do you think that traditional beliefs strengthen or rather undermine social cohesion and maybe political stability. You know that for Central Asian societies, political stability is very important. And
that's a very interesting question. I don't have the definitive answer.
Sure, of course. I mean, just
I think that logically, we could hypothesize both relationship. We could see that we have traditional beliefs, and therefore we are more inclined to be part of networks, and therefore that could be a driver or a determinant of social capital. At the same time, we could also argue that precisely because you have these traditional beliefs, you're less likely to engage in this network that enhance social capital, a la Robert Putnam. And so, but the empirical evidence that we have at the moment, is that not only countries with higher level of social capitals have a lower percentage of people who believe in traditional beliefs, but also we know that at the micro level, individuals who believe in traditional stuff like in the people's ability to cast curses or believe in witchcraft and so forth and so on, are much more less likely to have social capital. So there's an element of I cannot say of pathological or social apathy or whatever, but there's something going on. We did a paper with my friend Abel Quiniondo from University of Dar es Salaam and with Nigmajan Kujambayev on basically the relationship between conspiracy theories and traditional beliefs. And we say, well, we know that a lot of people, or well, not a lot of people, but some people do believe in traditional beliefs. We know that some people believe in conspiracy theories. And what we found is that the people that believe in either one or the other are more likely to believe in the other set of beliefs. And the way we explained that was to use a semiotic approach to basically claim that the mindset of both of them is very similar because they make sense of reality in the same way, and that's how we found that's how we explain our findings. I think that precisely because as I said, that there's a parallelism or a similarity between the mindset of a traditional believer and that of a conspiratorial theorist, which is not the most socially inclined individual. Is not someone who believes who will join. Maybe not. Actually, they could probably join network, but self-reinforcing networks of people that have the same type of not always accurate or correct beliefs, and so they believe in conspiracy theories.
Yeah, very insightful, Riccardo. Thank you. It's just, that for Central Asia, and particularly for Kazakhstan, we know that social capital exists, but still the level of trust is low. And when you talked about that traditional beliefs, in fact, reduce the level of trust, right? And the issue is how can we raise this, level of trust?
How to improve trust?
Yes.
Well, that's funny because, if
and
you
particularly
look
to institutions,
the study of trust and social capital became popular after Robert Putnam published in 1993 Making Democracy Work, which was about Italy actually.
Sure.
But
Yes.
but the idea that some people lack civic values came from a book of Banfield in 1958 about the moral basis the moral basis of backward societies, where he was basically saying these people in southern Italy, in this village of Montegrano, are poor because they're not civic, they don't trust each other, they're selfish. And the common theme that goes along, I think, between this Banfield study and Putnam is that he's got the role of how you trust people and the role of the extended family,
Yeah.
which you do have. So that's paradoxical. I would explain, probably not knowing enough about the level of trust here, but I think it's to some extent the legacy of a political regime that in the end didn't turn out to be phenomenally successful, and actually did quite a few things that were not entirely beneficial to the population. And so when the state organization that's supposed to keep you safe and healthy and protect you is actually the cause of your problems, the Kulakization, and so forth and so on. Obviously, you're going to be a little bit more skeptical, and so that's one thing. And for sure, here in the region, we have a very high level of traditional beliefs. I mean, I was looking at some data for, I include Russia in Central Asia because there's...
Sure, yes,
okay.
As Eurasia, yeah.
But, between Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, if you look at the average percentage of people who believe in witchcraft, in superstition, who believe that it's important to... or is legitimate to use sorcery to protect one's family or whatever, you're wearing talisman and all these kind of superstitious or traditional ritualistic forms of behavior, you see that it's much higher than the global average. I mean, and even though this region is much more socioeconomically developed than other parts of the planet, and I think to some extent that bears to a much older tradition, so to speak, that you have in the region where you have had historically a rich tradition of shamanism, studied extensively by Eliade. Eliade said shamanism is a South Siberian, Central Asian phenomenon. End of the story. That's the real shamanism. And I think that one way or another, shamans have survived in the collective mind, in the collective psyche of Central Asian people, and so that kept relevant these traditional beliefs or whatever, and for reasons that we don't yet understand, that also may have an impact on the level of trust and social capital.
Yes, it's really fascinating to see how traditional beliefs, traditional norms actually coexist with modernity, right? And this is what Inglehart was talking about, right? Coexistence of different norms and values in a society, and Central Asia is a good example of that. On the one hand, we think about the gender equality and environmental issues, and on the other, we are quite superstitious, right? And follow these traditional norms.
I mean, the work of Inglehart is very interesting because especially the work that he did with Welzel, with Baker and others, he did a series of studies that were, I think, path-breaking, where they invented or promoted and used, these scales, these dimensions from religious to or traditional to modern rational, from someone concerned with survival values to emancipative values, and there was very interesting line of work that was used to map countries worldwide and to look at the conditions that will enhance or reduce the probability of democratic survival and the quality of democracy. I mean, that was very interesting, but he was very adamant that, the impact of socioeconomic development on the value transformation is not automatic, direct, and unequivocal. I mean, it works to some way, but not the same way in different places because, the different cultures of different places are different. And he was very much aware of that. And so I think that's something that the work that I'm doing with my collaborators is showing as well, is that in some countries, they were poorer, they became richer, they had better education, more urbanization, more advanced structure of the economy, and certain values have declined. But in other places where these traditions were more deeply rooted and embedded in the collective psyche or in the mindset of the population, they persist very strongly. And as a bracket, the work of Gershman, I think it was a paper of 2016, 2018, showed that right now 49% of the world population believes in witchcraft.
Wow.
Yes,
that's amazing.
Yes,
it's a really a big number.
So some things that we think are long forgotten or no longer relevant are still very much common. I mean, even in countries like Sweden. Sweden is the country with the lowest percentage of witchcraft believers, but still Sweden, modern, progressive, rich, intellectually sophisticated, you name it.
Circular,
I
right?
mean, one of the most advanced countries in the world. 9% of the Swedish population believes in witchcraft. That's an amazing result.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and of course, Riccardo, since we are working in the Graduate School of Public Policy and we're concerned about quality of the government and governance quality, I would like to ask you, what do you think about this impact of traditional beliefs or superstitions on the quality governance?
Well, I mean, I obviously don't have an empirical answer, but my guess is that it's a big problem because I have always say that a government policy is successful insofar as their compliance from the people. And
accountability, right?
Well, accountability is important too, yes. But gotta be policy compliance. We all remember 5 years ago there was a COVID-19 pandemic. And governments around the world were telling citizens, wear a mask, keep social distances, get your vaccinations. And obviously, because, by becoming vaccinated and wearing masks and basically avoiding crowded area or being too close to people, we were reducing the risk of transmission, or we were reducing the spread of the disease. Obviously, that measures are that the government advocates or propose was successful only insofar as people were willing to actually do what the government was recommending. And so, and what I think is absolutely true is that an individual who has traditional beliefs is more likely not to trust the government, is less likely to trust the proposal, the policies that the government suggests or advocates, and is less likely to comply. And that creates a huge governance problem. And I think that this is one of the areas that historically governments have paid little attention to, and instead they should receive more attention, because I think they will give government a better understanding of what they should do to actually make their own action more successful.
Okay, Riccardo, thank you so much for your very important insights about the influence and importance of traditional beliefs today in the era of modernity. But I also would like to ask some questions related to your another strand of research, political parties, because
Sure.
you also were involved in this type of research area. So do you think that political parties still matter in an era of personalization of politics and strong executives? Which is probably very relevant to this part of the world, I mean, Central Asia.
Absolutely. I think that it is impossible to overemphasize the importance of political parties. They are the unsung heroes of modern governance. All governments, to some extent, even in countries that are not fully democratic, has to be responsive to popular demands. Therefore, the key question is, where or how do governments find out what the people want? Well, traditionally, the transmission belt between the society and the state was represented by the political party. The political party was an instrument for selecting candidates, understanding what the people wanted, crafting programs, running the elections, sometimes winning the election, running the country, and they were also instrumental then to explain to the voters the decision of the government. I think a political party is the single most important institution for making everything else work. And there was a famous quote by Maurice Duverger in the early 1950s,
Sure,
I think 1951, where he was saying, well, we can understand political system without knowing constitution, as long as we understand party. But if we ignore parties and we know the constitution, we don't understand anything. I think that was a very valuable lesson, and I think it's still true 70 years later. I think great mistakes many of us, not me, but many political scientists have made was to think that political parties had become obsolete, no longer relevant institutions,
Right.
that we could create other venue of representations. And so in the 90s, there was this talk about fluid parties, light parties, whatever parties. And that was just a terrible idea that I think was, if not the cause, certainly a correlate of the increasing fragmentation and polarization of opinion of the electorates. The fact that we now are all surprised that we have segments of the electorate with very strange ideas. Well, is certainly related to the fact that parties have become weaker. We need strong parties. And I give you an example. Singapore, which is more or less democratic, if you talk to anybody who wants to discuss the success of Singapore, which is out of the question. I mean, Singapore went from being a not terribly rich country to be a super rich country.
Over 20 years, for a very short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, whatever it took. But they explain the success of Singapore on the basis of two factors. One, great leadership, Lee Kuan Yew. Second, great state apparatus, bureaucracy, whatever. And, whenever I hear this simplistic account, I'm very much perplexed because there's no mention of what I think was an equally important part of Singapore's success, which is the PAP, the People Action Party. Without the People Action Party, neither Lee Kuan Yew nor the government could have enjoyed the level of success that they have enjoyed. And I think that we need to bring back to the attention of policymakers in Central Asia, but worldwide, that investing in political parties, creating strong political parties, institutionalizing political parties is going to make their political systems work better.
Okay. So what do you think about the strengths and weaknesses of party systems in Central Asia and in Kazakhstan particularly? And what do you think, what would be the measures, for instance, to attract the young people to participate in political parties? Become members of the political parties, because even if these political organizations are important, but we know that the level of interest among the young people is quite low. So what do you think, what are the strengths and weaknesses of this?
Well, I mean, I think that's it's a huge problem. First of all, because I think that, and I wrote that at some point, the mindset of voters has become a little bit and I don't mean this in a clinical way, but it's become a little bit schizophrenic in the sense that in the 50s or in the 1960s, voters had cohesive, consistent sets of preferences. So if you were a person of the left, you were in favor of the welfare state, of taxation, whatever. If you were from the right, you had a different set of preferences. Right now, one position on a policy issue does not provide any indication of a one person position on a different policy issues. That's a big problem. I think it's a problem for parties, because parties in the end need to come up with coherent platforms and to capture voters that have different preferences or inconsistent preferences across issues. Is a big problem. I don't know how to handle that. So that's the first point. The second point is that I think we know too little about the younger voters, whose preferences, as far as I can tell, but it's just my guess, are even more volatile or inconsistent than that of previous generations. So how could party appeal to them? I don't know. I mean, that's something that policymakers will have to think about more with greater attention, because the fact that you have these students, these young voters who come to an age where they can start voting, and they have. They could be swinging election one way or another. They could advocate a radical policy measure that may not ultimately be beneficial for the country. So I think it's very important to actually bring them in, socialize them into political parties. I think probably the only thing I could think of would be probably to invest a little bit more on youth wings of the various political parties. So where youngsters can actually join and become friends with other people the same age, and they start getting and participating in the political life of an organization. And I think that could be a way to do it.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting insights, Riccardo. Because what we have in Kazakhstan, such a paradoxical situation. On the one hand, the young people say that their voices are not heard, their interests are not taken into account in the country. This is according to the surveys conducted in Kazakhstan and in other Central Asian states. But on the other hand, we also see that young people do not participate in the elections.
Yeah.
So
But
this is kind of,
this goes back to what I was saying before.
Right.
You have a problem of trust.
Right.
I mean, in the survey that Nick Majan did and that we used for a paper that we're working on, I think 75% of these young respondents say people cannot be trusted. And so,
That's
if
a
you
big,
don't,
huge number.
is huge. And we are talking about college students. So people that are, above average in terms of socioeconomic status, educational attainment, and so forth and so on. So these people that are going to be part of the country's elite one way or another, whether we like it or not, have 75% of them reports not trusting the people can't be trusted is dramatic, because that explains that whatever a government does, they will think, oh, bad idea. And also they're not going to participate in the political system because they say there's no point doing it because we don't believe that these people will pay attention to what we have to say. And so, it's a vicious circle. And that's why, I think to develop a better understanding of what are the root causes, including traditional beliefs of this lack of trust, is very, very important. It's very important not just for us who write paper, write books, and sometimes appear on podcast. It's important, I think, for the government.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I just recently also read an article about the institutional trust, and one of the reasons was the cultural context and particularly power distance. So if people don't participate in the decision-making process, then they feel kind of alienated themselves from, important decisions, important policies from the government. So it's important to engage more people and in the decision-making process.
And that's traditionally what political parties have always done.
Okay.
And that's why I keep saying, whether people like it or not, we need to bring political parties back. We need to strengthen political parties. We need to bring parties back to being able to perform the functions and the tasks that they once did, because without properly functioning parties, all these other problems, polarization of the electorate, crazy idea, conspiratorial ideas will surface and will be very hard to deal with.
Okay. Riccardo, thank you so much for very interesting answers to my questions. And I have maybe a couple of questions about the future. So it is related to your traditional beliefs research. For instance, what elements of traditional political culture may become more influential in the next decade, in your point of view?
That's a very interesting question. I don't think I can generalize globally. But
maybe for the Central Asian context.
But we know that, for example, or at least we know from some of the survey data that we collected, that we compared to an original study conducted by the Pew Research Institute or Center some 12 years ago. And we see that in some areas, some beliefs or some traditional practices, like going to a shaman, have declined. Okay. And that I found a little bit puzzling, because from my interactions with my Kazakhstani friends, colleagues, acquaintances, I think that going to shaman for treatment, either physical or emotional, is still very common. So I was a bit surprised to detect from these numbers a decline. But witchcraft beliefs and superstitious beliefs are much more common. And so the key question there is, why would someone aged 17 to 20, believe in superstition, that people can cast curses and so forth and so on? And I don't have an answer. I think that there's two ways we can look at it. One way is that this is the legacy of an old tradition that still manages to survive somehow. And so, it is so deeply ingrained in our psyche that we can't shake it off. Okay. I think that there's also possibly a different explanation. And to make the point, I need to jump back 100 years. If you go back 100 years, we, a little bit more than 100 years, let's say 125 years, between the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, there was a very successful philosophical movement called Positivism, and which elevated science and technology to a quasi-religious level, and the basic notion was science will give us all the answers. We are going to ensure peace and prosperity for everybody. That didn't work. World War One broke out. Millions of people died in battle, and not just in battle. And so this faith in the science was greatly compromised, and as a reaction to that, there was a widespread diffusion all over Europe, the Western world, and not just the Europe and the Western world, but also, in what would eventually had just become a Soviet Union, of beliefs that they call traditional, for lack of a better word. And I think something similar could be happening now. Right now, we are placing a great deal of faith in scientific progress and technology, thinking that they will provide all the answers for all the problems that we have, from climate change to food shortage to peace, and I think that maybe some of the people that embrace these so-called traditional beliefs are people that are doing so in reaction to science or and technology or scientism, or to the perceived failure of scientism, science and technology to produce the results that people had hoped to get out of it. So I think these are two very different explanations. I think that I don't know which one is the correct one. Maybe it's a mix of both, but I think that's part of the story. And the final thing is that one thing that I think contributes to the popularity of traditional beliefs, regardless of whether they're really ancient traditional beliefs or are new repackaged beliefs that want to sound old even though they're not.
Old wine in new bottles.
It's new wine in an old bottle. Actually, it's a new, a big. There are people that claim to have rediscovered ancient magic and knowledge, and they repackage it and they sell it. But in reality, it's all modern stuff. But
Sure.
anyway, but the bottom line is that I think periods of instability, are a key driver or a determinant of the popularity of these beliefs. Because in periods of peace, of prosperity, we are all happy with our material conditions, and so we don't look for anything else. But it's when we start having anxiety about the future, when we start having anxiety about peace, prosperity, and so forth and so on, that we need to look for some forms of, for lack of a better word, psychological support. And so that's when people turn to religion. Nick Mejan and I have a paper on that about how religious beliefs are higher for people who feel uncertain about the future. And I think the same is true for traditional beliefs, because you want something that in a perceived psychological turmoil or anxiety, can give you an anchor of stability.
Thank you, Riccardo. And so my last question to you would be, what are your plans for the future in terms of research? What projects do you want to do in the future? Maybe related to traditional beliefs as well.
I mean, I'm trying to put together a special issue of a journal on traditional beliefs and their political consequences, looking at a wider range of political behaviors or phenomena. So we're looking at traditional beliefs and trust, electoral behavior, but also terrorism and so forth and so on. We are doing that using a variety of data that were either collected in large multinational, cross-national surveys by other institutions that they put the data at our disposal, sometimes using data that we, meaning some of my collaborators were able to collect directly. So hopefully, next year or soon, at least, we should have this special issue. And I think it's going to be very interesting.
Yes, great. I'm looking forward to read it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Riccardo.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Voices from GSPP Research and Practice. We hope that you received lots of important insights about public policy and research. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe, share with your colleagues and friends, and stay tuned for other stories from our faculty, PhD students, and alumni. Until next time, take care and stay curious.